This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
My name's Di and I'm an addictive eater.
Hi.
Grateful to be at a meeting, not to be eating. I believe I was born an addictive eater because I was always weird around food. But it's not how I was with food that was my biggest problem in life. It was how I felt about myself and how I was. I was a really self-conscious kid, and as I got into adolescence, I was just neurotic. I did a tertiary education for a health professional, and I learnt about neuroses and psychoses, and I definitely identified with neuroses. Not that I could admit that to anybody. I didn't want to fail my training, and I was training to be a therapist, so I certainly couldn't admit that I had the symptoms of that condition. Because the way I was, I had to present well, because on the inside I felt like I had a do life, so I presented very confidently, competently. I was Miss Independent and I was Miss Career Woman, and it basically looked to the world as if I got whatever I wanted and I did whatever I wanted. It didn't feel like that to me. It was, like when I turned 21 and everybody's supposed to celebrate their 21st, I didn't want to celebrate because I didn't feel like I had anything to celebrate. But you couldn't not celebrate your 21st, so I agreed to go out to dinner with aunties and uncles and my, collection of friends, so that I could be seen to be celebrating my 21st, even though it was the last thing I wanted to do. Because of how I felt about myself, I basically was quite successful on the outside. I did well, so to speak. I completed my training. I'm the only one that knows that I finished my first year with an A, my second year with a B, and my third year with a C. Mm-hmm. And then I did not want to practice in this education that I'd qualified in. I had to, because of course I had to work, I had to get a job and enter the workforce. As I say, my life sort of followed the path that it's expected to follow, although I must admit, in my early 20s, you were either getting married and going overseas, or fortunately I was going overseas. Because there wasn't any sign of getting married, so that was all right. I was going overseas. And I had 4.5 years of living in Britain before I decided it was time to come back to New Zealand, because if I didn't, I might never. I had a disagreement with the boss, and I was cleaning the pantry that weekend. I thought, right, I'm coming home. I'm coming back to New Zealand. And the way the disease manifested in me, I had my first nervous breakdown relatively quickly after returning to New Zealand. I didn't know what was happening. I knew I was highly stressed, and I didn't know whether I had paranoid schizophrenia, delusions of grandeur. But I'm in my early 20s, and I'm having a breakdown, and a possible solution to this breakdown is to walk into the sea with a brick tied around my waist, because I was so humiliated. So my life was over as far as I was concerned. I'd look at young people, and I'm only 25, 26 myself, but I'd look at young people and thought, oh, God, I wish I could start my life again, except I don't know what I would have done differently. But So mid-20s was when the disease really manifested itself in terms of the second half of step 1. And I was another 7 or 8 years of being unemployable, another breakdown, admission to a psychiatric hospital. I paid for the privilege, well actually mostly it was my parents who paid for my privilege. And after all of that psychiatric and self-help therapy, I got involved in an organisation that who provided activities for adults with mental illness, and I had a mental illness diagnosis by this stage, depressive disorder. And so I joined that organisation and I got involved, and they had a tendency to employ their clients if at all possible, and I was one of the higher functioning clients of the organisation, and I became employed there, and at that time I thought to myself, everything will be all right. I'll have a job again because I haven't been working for 7 or 8 years. I'll be a respectable citizen, and I'll join a tennis club so I'll have something to do on the weekend. And needless to say, it wasn't all right. Having a job just seemed to make life even worse, just far too stressful. But my boss was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he could see the disease in me. So he used to talk at length, and I used to not agree with a lot of what he had to say. Well, I used to question. He'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 13 years, and I thought, well, why would you still be in AA after 13 years? And he'd talk about a disease, and I thought that was a load of, baloney. But he invited me to an AA meeting one lunchtime, and which I thought was a very strange invitation to extend to a nice woman like myself. But I didn't have a reason to say no, and he encouraged me to listen to the similarities and listen to the feelings and listen to the thinking. Listen to the similarities, not the difference, which I think helped. I think it was really good advice. And I can't tell you what I heard at that first meeting, but whatever I heard at that first meeting made me want to get to more of those meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't see my boss for the next 2 weeks because I was on a holiday, but I went to more AA meetings. I think I probably went to one every day. Because I obviously got hope. I obviously identified at that first meeting. And so here I am, turning up at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, despite myself, and before I know it, I start to meet some of the people that are sitting in the room tonight. I can remember saying to one young woman, what meetings does she go to? And I meant AA meetings, but she disclosed to me that she belonged to a 12-step, a food fellowship. And I thought, oh my God, it was like the seed was planted. I knew that in many ways my eating had been like my drinking, and I strongly suspected that I was a candidate for this food fellowship as well. But I wasn't happy about that. It just wasn't what I had planned for myself. But even so, I found out as much as I could about recovery in this fellowship, and I got to know who the members in AA were who came to this fellowship, and I noticed that I was really attracted to those particular members' recoveries. And I just made lots of inquiries, and my sponsor was a member of both fellowships, and I used to talk to her about how I didn't need to be a member of that fellowship. And she'd say to me, well, Di, nobody's saying you do. And people who don't have a problem don't go on about whether they have a problem or not. And finally she said to me, to put myself out of my misery, to either decide to come to a meeting of that fellowship or decide not to. And I sort of said, or, I sort of begrudgingly said, all right, then I'll come to a meeting, how long is it? And at that first meeting, somebody said they used to be a rigid thinker, and I couldn't believe that somebody could say that out loud, because I knew I was a rigid thinker. And I thought, oh my God, you can't say that out loud, I'm just going to stick to the other fellowship, thanks very much. Which I did for 3 months. Until I still had the same sponsor. She must have suggested come to 6 of the food fellowship meetings, and which I did. I like suggestions like that. They're very concrete. You know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. 6 meetings. At the end of 6 meetings, I decided I wasn't as bad as all of you. Well, I could clearly see you had a solution. I was really, really attracted to your recovery. You had a life between meals, and you laughed and you joked and you talked to one another, and you just, I was really attracted to your recoveries. But I guess I wasn't quite bad enough. I wasn't quite convinced that I was as bad as you, and I wasn't entirely convinced that you weren't a cult. And so basically I had a bit more market research to do. So I went upon my merry way doing my market research, going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, because I definitely needed to be going to meetings of some kind. And I'd been more or less a year in AA, and I hadn't had a drink, and I hadn't had a pill. And I was fairly miserable. My sponsor never used to phone me up, but she phoned me up and said, how does it feel to be a year sober? And I said, it's the pits. And I knew it was because of the food that it was the pits. I knew it was because I was still eating. And so eventually I thought I had been sick of being sick when I came into AA, but after this first year, I was able to admit on a deeper level, I guess, that I really was sick of being sick. And I knew there was a solution in this fellowship, because I saw it in you people, and when I saw you in AA. And so I decided that living in the solution had to be better than living in the problem, because the evidence of that was overwhelming, the number of you who were living in the solution. And so I understood that the solution involved letting go of the food, stopping eating just like an alcoholic stops drinking. That solution made perfect sense to me, and by the time I made that decision that living in the solution has to be better than living in the problem, I really wanted that food plan. And as I say, I understood, I knew that I wasn't starting life on a food plan. I totally got that I was going to be stopping eating just like an alcoholic stops drinking. And as I say, I really wanted the means of doing that, much to my surprise, because up until this point it was one of the last things I was willing to, do. And I wanted that, but I didn't want what went with it, because I knew I had a reputation that I didn't deserve, and I didn't want anyone else to know what I was really like. I wasn't sure I could face it myself. Just the way I treated people, or the way I spoke to people. And anyway, I started following direction in regard to the food, and in other ways as well. But in the back of my mind, I was only going to do it for as long as it took to prove that it doesn't work for me, because then I'd be able to get on with what I really wanted to do, which was eat what I wanted to eat and run my own life. But there was just this little sane voice that said, that is what you've been doing for 37 years, eating what you want, when you want, and running your own life. So clearly that doesn't work for you. And when my sponsor suggested to me, after about 6 months of not picking up the first one, coming to the meetings, my sponsor suggested to me that I get off the fence, close the back door and get off the fence. And I thought to myself, how does she know? Because I've never talked to her, because it was too far in the recesses of my mind, this thing that I'm only going to try it, so I can be free to, forget about it, eliminate it as an option. But when she said that, I thought my response would have been, how dare you speak to me like that? But it wasn't. It was, that sounds like it would be a relief. Just a relief. And if, I'm not quite finished sharing, but if I was to stop here, I would just sum it up and say, that describes what has happened. I've just gotten on with it. Gotten on with recovery. And look, I loved the way, I loved a lot of the language I heard in early recovery. Or I keep coming back, just putting your bum on a seat. You don't have to agree with what you hear. That gave me permission to keep on coming back, because I had to work out whether I liked you or not, and I wasn't sure that I did. I mean, even though I was attracted to your recoveries, at the same time I didn't necessarily think that you were going to be the most fun people to hang out with. And why would you come back to a group where you had that thinking about them? You wouldn't, because you couldn't. But I heard to just take the action, put your bum on a seat. And I guess I had hope for the first time in a long time that my life would, if I did what you people did, my life would get better too. I never thought that I was terminally unique. And I had good sponsorship. I came to lots of meetings. I can remember I said to my sponsor, must have been about 6 months in or whatever, they used to talk about doing 90 meetings in 90 days. And I'd done that, probably done more. And so I said to my sponsor, I think I might just cut my meetings back a little bit. And she didn't say anything. Anyway, from whatever she said, I don't think she said anything, but I could tell that she didn't think it was a good idea. Actually, I think she said something like, oh well, see how that goes. I could tell that she didn't think it was a good idea. And so I realised it wasn't a good idea either, because, well, number one, I live by myself, so I was going to be left with me if I didn't go to a meeting, and I knew that that wasn't going to be good. I knew I was always going to be better to come to a meeting and get the treatment for my disease. I can remember one night I rang my sponsor up, got home from a meeting, and I rang her up and I said, I'm feeling quite depressed. And she said, have you ever thought when you're feeling like that it might be a good idea to think about someone that's worse off than you? And I could hardly believe that she said that. Because I've been to counselling for decades and no counsellor would say that, no counsellor ever said that to me. And I also could hardly believe that my response to that was, yeah, that is a good idea. So, yeah, I am very grateful that it's an action program, because, as I've said, I was able to take actions that I didn't necessarily think were a good idea. And also, I had an attitude in early recovery. I would get on the phone, I would ring, and my sponsor would answer the phone, and then I wouldn't say anything. And I would be thinking, well, I've made the phone call, so you do the work now, because I've made the phone call. And sometimes I would ring and I knew she wouldn't be home, because, I've done what I was supposed to, I've made the phone call. And I can remember when she said something, I must have said something along the lines of, I tried to get hold of you, but I couldn't. And she said something like, some people manage to get hold of me every day. And I thought, oh my God. There was a realisation that you could do that, and that people would actually want to do that. And when she said something like, she must have said something like, I'm willing to hear from you every day. I want you to phone me every day, or whatever it was she said. And when I got off the phone, I thought to myself, she is prepared to hear from me every day. And I mean, I am misery. I am Miss Misery Guts. So I got that she might not really want to hear from me every day, but she was willing to hear from me every day. And that really made an impression on me. And I look back to early recovery, and I think that Bill and Bob's kindergarten was in many ways a hell of a lot of fun. And that's quite some time ago. And now, quite some years down the track, I would like to share a little bit about what it's like now. I would like to share, about my restored relationships, in particular with my mother. I have just the most loveliest relationship with my mother, and I can remember I rang my sponsor up and I said, is phoning my mother in her early 80s, is phoning her once a week too often? And my sponsor said, only you would think that, Di. So, okay, it's not too often. So I do phone my mother every week, and I suppose in a nutshell, I know I'm an adult daughter, and we really have the loveliest of relationships. It's very easy to be on the phone for 45 minutes, an hour, solving the problems of the world. And I have a good relationship with all my family members. I am a part of that family. If I wasn't in recovery, well, I wouldn't be a part of that family. I know it's due to recovery that I have a relationship with my nieces and nephews and with their kids that is something that, like another instruction I received from my sponsor a few years ago, was along the lines of, I wasn't sure what to do about birthday presents or Christmas presents for the great nieces and nephews, because there was an increasingly large pool. And anyway, we worked out a plan that I do what I do. I actually don't buy Christmas presents, but I deposit money and I might buy a book or something, a little birthday present for each of my great nieces and nephews. And so that, left to my own devices, I wouldn't take actions like that, because I just wouldn't be able to. And I know I'm a part of their lives, which is nice. And what it's like now, well, I mean, clearly I don't want the food. I'm completely not interested in food. I enjoy my meals. I don't have a depressive disorder diagnosis. I don't suffer from depression. I might feel a bit flat some days. Well, that's fine, because it's just for today. It's only, one day at a time. And actually that doesn't happen very often either. I do have very active thought processes some days. And I often share that if it didn't get any better than what it was now, that would be fine with me. It really would. But there are definitely areas in my life that I would really like to get better, and I believe if I keep coming and doing what I'm doing, that they will get better. As you all know, I feel like I'm going through a workplace restructuring, which is not actually what's happened, but with a new boss and a completely different style of management. That is how it feels. And I've received a lot of support, a lot of help from my sponsor in regards to how to conduct myself, because at times I've been beside myself with stinking thinking and critical stinking thinking and concern for my own well-being, concern, self-centered concern, and I've had to get on my knees and pray for some of my colleagues, which is not something I've had to do very much of over the years in recovery, and to find myself doing that 2 decades into recovery is not what I expected to be doing, because I just possibly thought that I was better than that. And it's been suggested that I need to let go of all my old ideas. And I remember when that was suggested, I thought, I thought that was something you said to newcomers. It wasn't something that I expected to be suggested so far into recovery. And, it's been suggested that basically it's all an opportunity to demonstrate God's omnipotence. And the wonderful thing is that it's all absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine that I have been feeling challenged, enormously challenged with the massive change, and I've had to take actions that I haven't had to take, for a long time. And what a relief it is to have those actions to take. What a relief to get on my knees before I go to work and pray for certain people, and to be able to conduct myself in a way that doesn't reflect the difficulty that I'm, that doesn't reflect my thinking. In early recovery, when my sponsor she said her thinking doesn't rule her thinking or her feelings don't rule her life anymore. And at the time I thought that she was saying my feelings and my thinking weren't important, which was a shock to have somebody say that to me. But when I got on the phone, I realised that wasn't what she was saying. You know, basically she was saying, forget about your feelings. She was saying that her feelings and her thinking don't rule her life. And I thought, well, that would be a relief, wouldn't it? That actually gave me hope. You know, my thinking, I am not my thinking. And I did really love, you know, hearing about stinking thinking. It's such a relief to have a design for living that really works. And I'm just incredibly grateful because I know I'm not cured of this disease, and I love being a part of Addictive Eaters Anonymous. It is my primary purpose to carry the message and try and help someone else, because it seems to me that not very many people do get well from this disease, and there's no particular reason, you know, why I'm here and others aren't. It's certainly not because I've made more of an effort or anything like that. It's just something I can't explain other than it's a God job. And I want to be here, and thank you for asking me to share.